it was a complex web of initiation rites, not just from girl to woman and boy to man, but initiations to assist people through their 4 chronological life stages. So for women, that's the maiden, the mother, the mage, and the crone. It's like the 4 seasons or the 4 lunar phases. And equally for the brothers, knight, king, magi, which is the sacred magician, not someone who does illusions, and the sage. There were also initiation rites every month to keep people accountable to themselves, conscious of the impact of the choices that they're making. For women, you've caught me at a really good time.
Yeah.
Because I'm really in a being space, not a doing space. So I'm really grateful and happy to have an opportunity to connect from there.
Yeah, and thank you for Sophie for introducing us.
Bless her.
It's nice, the ripples of the podcast about have this concept of maybe one person introduce someone else, and there's a big tangent. So after 100 episodes, that person along the way is actually linked to this person.
Wow. It's the whole 6 degrees of separation thing.
For sure. So maybe it's on you to introduce someone else. Maybe.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Happily.
It's this thing of, I think the best thing you can do for people is introduce them to other people that are going to fill them up. Yeah,
I think was sense that as we get more into the frequency of the Aquarian age, that because it's an air sign and it's about the sharing of ideas to create innovation for the future, anyone who crosses our path, we've got a message for them and they've got a message for us. So if we can just attune to our intuition, and it might be, I need to introduce them to this person, or I need to tell them about this book. But there's always an exchange of information, Yeah.
When did that start to feature in your life?
I can't remember a date. It was just an awareness.
Yeah.
Intuitively, I get around 2018, which is when I moved to Bali and became a global citizen. Yeah.
What does that mean, global citizen?
Well, I outgrew my country of origin. Yeah, because when I travel, I expand. The first time I went to Bali, I literally felt like I was 8 foot tall when I returned to Australia. And I suppose because you're having to draw upon yourself and you're always entering the unknown, that it allows for you to face your fears, your fear of not surviving, xenophobia in a foreign country, fear of not getting your needs met. So, and I walk a tantric path, and for me the essence of tantra is about facing your fears and transcending them.
Wow.
Transmuting shadows. So and I understand the closer that we get to a state of union, the more intense those fears are that come up. And perhaps that's why the calling that I've had the last few years has been to travel, and to leave behind security as I knew it.
So how long have you been digital nomad now?
Yeah, well, I started in 2018.
Yeah.
But I was in Bali for 2 years, and then I ended up back in Australia for 3 years. My daughter, she had gone to live with her father in Darwin, up the other end of Australia, when I was living in Melbourne, and cut contact for 3 years. So at first I was like a budgie in a cage staring at an open door, and then I realised I could go anywhere. And that was the catalyst for me going to Bali. And I think anyone who's been a sole parent, particularly if you don't have the support of family around you, you're not able to go out at night and do a yoga class. So when you've not had freedom and then you've got freedom, you want to spread your wings so wide. So, but my daughter then reconnected and needed me, so we ended up in the long lockdowns in Melbourne. And again, that was kind of like a catapult, a slingshot being pulled back, and then afterwards, I can't live in Australia. I just cannot. It's a trauma trigger for me going back there, that I'm going to get trapped there again, you know. And it's, sadly, I feel, in a way, trying to fulfill its original colonized intention, that of becoming a penal colony, a police state. You know, it's a testing ground for the rollout of Agenda 30 at a more rapid rate than it is in other parts of the world. And yeah, then the rollout of lockdowns and not being able to move freely. I mean, we had helicopters through the night circling our apartment block as a very strong message that we had to obey. And yeah, where I was living was a poorer socio-economic area, because I knew I needed to be near the beach because of the energies. I thought, okay, if I'm going to be in this scenario, I need to at least have nature very accessible. And the landscape of the beach helps us to return to innocence. Archetypally, it evokes Aphrodite, you know, in the mythology. That's her birthplace, where she rises from the sea foam. And so, yeah, I needed innocence in a time of such cynicism and fear. So we had, in Frankston it was, packs of police roaming the streets during the day. One day I sent my daughter to get groceries, and she had an armed policeman tell her to freeze and put her hands in the air, and he searched through her grocery bags. Found nothing, of course. I mean, what was she going to have other than groceries, you know? So it was such extreme abuses of power. I've since spoken to, you know, another woman who they were using heat sensor technology to see how many people were in their apartments and questioning them. You know, I was pulled over at a police checkpoint and asked which of the 3 reasons I was leaving the house for, and I was trembling with rage. And I said to him, my 17 or 16 as she was year old daughter has borderline personality disorder, and I'm in an apartment with her in lockdown. I don't need one of your 3 reasons to leave my house, you know. So it was just, yeah, you know, to be held against your will is a very serious infringement on our human rights. And the other reason that I'm not in Australia is that in writing my last book, The Grail, which maps the ancient mystic tradition that was hijacked and distorted to create Christianity by the Roman Empire, literally the cult of Rome. That is a tradition that is my ancestral birthright, and that was outlawed by the Roman Empire. So just being on the Celtic lands helps me to reconnect with my sacred rights, my birthrights. And the colonised countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, these are testing grounds for the rollout of Agenda 30, because people that are not on their ancestral lands are far more at risk of being manipulated and dominated by an aggressor, because you can't as easily draw upon the spirit of place. Yeah, you're not as connected to the land. You don't feel indigenous to the land. In fact, you know, this whole thing of white guilt, of shaming people of Western lineages, and those dense emotions like shame and guilt, they are so toxic. And we're all indigenous to the earth. We're all fractals of the mother, of the Gaia consciousness. And so, yeah, my heart wants to come home to my ancestral lands. I want to be in the Celtic Isles. I've got a dash of German, but mainly I'm Welsh on both my mum and dad's sides. So it's like when I'm in this landscape, it's like there's a romance with the land that happens, which I don't have in Australia, you know. So my identity has shifted from being Australian to being Celtic, because I've unveiled that false identity of colonialism.
Yeah, it's powerful. And just listen to your words. it resonates deeply, and it makes sense, you know, like there's a lot of history here in this part of the world, and even driving these roads and Lewis, I feel like there's this and where was I recently, where was I mean, I went to the Chalice Well in Glastonbury for the first time ever.
Wow.
And I'd never been, and no one's ever looked at me in the eye and said, you need to go. I would have gone.
Okay.
But I do that to people now, because I think there's this thing that really it's in my bones, you know. It kind of feels old, and it feels right to just walk into a very contained space and just feel welcome, but also feel like there's nothing new in the space. In a way, it felt like it just remains like very old, and it just takes me back to times where that would have been common. It would have been very accessible, having that in a center of a city, and it didn't feel like I needed to spend money or you know, you would go to city centres, and if you haven't got money, then it's like, what, do I feel welcome? And it comes at a big cost, right?
Right.
Of you were talking earlier about this kind of transactional spaces that we go, but I just felt welcome. I just felt welcome, and it felt really real to be there. And I feel that's happening more and more, perhaps, than it has for a few generations. But yeah, I'm interested to know a little bit more about the Holy Grail and how that's featured, and your work really there, because I imagine it's been a life's journey, right?
Yeah, it has. But I want to pick up on that word welcome. Even just hearing that word, it's so healing for the heart, you know, because that inner child in us, we don't just need food, water, air and shelter, we need to belong. And that sense of not belonging is what, you know, causes the child in us to act out in so many compulsive ways, because we don't feel a sense of kinship, clan. You know, I mean, now even the family unit is under attack, you know, with children being so addicted to the screen that the screen is the authority and not the parent, you know, which is why I made the conscious decision to remove the television when I was a parent. You know, we had a TV-free house, and then when one was introduced, I quickly saw the shift in authority and then got rid of it again. But of course, they're all pervasive with all the little screens and, you know. But yeah, like you go into a cafe nowadays and so much is contactless, you know, whether it's they want you to scan a QR code at your table, you know, or order in a way that you're not having human connection, and it's an abuse. We're sentient beings. We need connection. You know, we crave union. And that's union with ourselves, union with nature, union with the cosmos, union with each other. And so what we're calling progress is a deterioration of the world soul. And it's an abuse, this dehumanization, and trying to convince us that it's more convenient. No, it's not.
How much do you think convenience is the driver, and it's just new iterations of things that, as sentient but also primal creatures, beings, not creatures, there's a distinction actually between creatures and beings. We're definitely different, but how much do you think is that kind of natural urge, that kind of just unconscious driver to make things easier for ourselves and to go for the path of least resistance with our cards, with our phones, with our convenience? The easy peelers, oranges, and these little, like, they seem minute and they seem just it's just that, you know, just Yeah.
But it's all a devil's bargain.
Yeah, there's so many things, of course. We live in the age of convenience, but we're so marketed to, and it feels like I have to reach for that when I'm not already full and I haven't got the resources to perhaps distinguish and discern between what's good for me and what's easier for me, because they're very different. But what do you think's driving what you mentioned, that or an orchestration or some sort of, you say agenda, and for me agenda really means like these are decisions being made to separate, and I always come back to, well, if you had power and that was a threat, you'd want more of it. You'd want to keep the control because it's a threat to your own survival. And I always come to that, it makes sense that more power wants more power. And how do you do that?
Yes.
Well, how do you control? How do you get what you want if you're an authority? And you then, well, we see it and there's evidence for it. It's people that don't feel enough, so you can sell things to them and yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. Okay, first of all, those that are the most disempowered seek power compulsively. It's an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we end up with tyrants at the top of the pyramid of power. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I see the greatest issue that we face is the immaturity of the collective psyche. And the word psyche means soul. The world's soul is ego dominant. So when we're ego dominant, we always want what we think is better, faster, easier, grass is greener. And when we're heart or soul dominant, we're instead in a place of gratitude for what we have. So what I see is the most pressing need at the moment is to midwife as many people across that threshold from ego to soul, which is an internal shift from living hell on earth to living heaven on earth, not being dominated by the wounded child, the wounded teenager, but helping to facilitate the rebirth of the inner adult, the inner parent.
Which looks after itself.
Is self-fulfilling.
And doesn't look to external means for the answers.
Right? Is sovereign. And the word sovereign means king or queen. And those archetypal energies of the inner king or queen or mother, father reside in the heart. So the shift is us making that shift from being solar plexus dominant, so lower mental, rationally dominant, to being more sentient, more feeling dominant. For instance, I mentioned before I'm on a sabbatical, and I'm a doer. What I'm doing at the moment is giving myself a holiday from my mind by adopting a practice by Byron Katie, where you only do something when you feel to do it, rather than when you think you should be doing something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we spoke earlier about the busyness of people, the word business. It's all a distraction from the torment of the soul. It's like the busier that you are, the more you're caught up in a mania, in a compulsion to avoid yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we've normalized that, which is why we see relationship breakdown at 50%. And those that are still in relationship are often there just out of need and security. It's not necessarily a conscious choice. So our biggest issue is avoidance, but it's based on immaturity. And in the ancient world, getting back to the Grail, it was a complex web of initiation rites. Not just from girl to woman and boy to man, but initiations to assist people through their 4 chronological life stages. So for women, that's the maiden, the mother, the mage, and the crone. It's like the 4 seasons or the 4 lunar phases. And equally for the brothers, knight, king, Magi, which is the sacred magician, not someone who does illusions, and the sage. There were also initiation rites every month to keep people accountable to themselves, conscious of the impact of the choices that they're making. For women, that was meeting during the darkest phase of the moon, dark moon, and for men, that was meeting once a year during the winter solstice. And this is the Holy Grail. That's what it was. It was a rite of passage mid-year for the men to assist them during their dark night of the soul, on the understanding if they hadn't integrated the inner mother, okay, the conscious feminine, they were at risk of injury, illness, depression, and even suicide midwinter during the solar lowest ebb. And what I mean by that is, if you haven't developed a healthy feminine in your psyche, and the psyche is both feminine and masculine, right, then the inner dark father, Darth Vader, which is what means dark father, rules the psyche, and he will cut a man down to size midwinter, because just like in the afternoon the shadows loom larger, so too in autumn and winter our shadows loom larger as we have less energy, right? Just like when a child is sick, they have less energy and they're more whiny, more clingy, or when a woman is in a preluteal phase or luteal phase, premenstrual, 80% of the body's energy goes into menstruation, so she's more irritable, more, her wounds, her insecurities, her fears are up. And likewise for men midwinter. So it's about us embracing our cyclic nature as sentient beings. This is what the Grail taught, so that we could become socially sustainable, personally sustainable. Because we've only got to look to the fact that the earth is in the state that she's in to go, well, we're part of the earth, everything's interconnected. This is why in the Grail parable of the Fisher King, the ethos of that parable, that medicine story, is that man and the land are one. So when the land is sick, it's a reflection that the collective consciousness is sick. So our global conversation around sustainability is focused on, we must respond externally to the symptoms, right? We've got to build, wind turbines or whatever. But in fact, the reverse is true. Reality is a reflection of the internal state. So what we need to do is respond to our lack of sustainability as souls. This is a time for, reinstating what was taken from us during that brutal takeover by the Roman Empire, and reinstate our true human rights, our sacred rights, which is how we practice our connection to the land and the cosmos. So we have a true identity of who we are, that we are both primal and cosmic beings. Our DNA, that is who we are. Whether we're a vegan or a feminist or trans, these are all false identities, and they cause division, squabbling, fighting over who's more disempowered, who deserves more funding, who has least representation. It's all an ego fight. It's a distraction
from the truth.
Right.
It reminds me of the Rain Man. Do you know the story? Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
When he comes, the story of when the rains have got, there's a tribe, I think it's like based in Africa or something.
China originally.
China, there you go. Yeah. Do you want to tell it? 'Cause I feel like you tell it better.
Oh, we can tell it together. Yeah. You start.
Well, the rains have come and they are relentless and they will not stop. And all the people in the village are praying and wondering, like, how do we stop the rains? How do we stop the floods? And someone arrives in the village. Do they call someone in to come and help?
I know a different version.
Oh, do you? Let me tell you mine.
So, yeah.
So I get told this by Eric Godsey, which is, he's over in America, he does a lot of shadow work, and he talks about this. He's talked about this quite a lot. And he said they call someone in, and this rain man comes into the village and goes into he says, okay, I need to go into the yurt, into the little finca or whatever it might be. And then goes in, he's in there for days. 3 days, 4 days pass, and the rain stopped. And he comes out, and they're like, oh, amazing, how did you do this? He said, well, when the environment's out of balance, is all I did was come into balance internally, and then the external unfolded as so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that story. So the version I knew was the opposite, in that it was a drought.
Oh,
so they
wow.
were inviting rainmakers in to make it rain, to bring the rain.
Maybe that was it.
But the same, it's the same. But that he went into so the previous rainmakers had come and they'd done the rain dance and the, prostrations. Yeah, which is kind of like giving away our power to the idea of a perceived external authority as God, not recognizing it's within us, which is Zen, and that he was in the hut for 4 days, 1 day for each of the directions, each of the elements. So he completed a cycle, a sacred circle. And I love that you've touched on this, because in that Holy Grail rite of passage that the men did once a year, facilitated by a Magdalene, a woman who had distilled the wisdom of the cycles within her own womb and reached moon pause, the men were taken through a spiraling inward over 4 days for each of the 4 directions, each of the 4 elements, to honestly review where they were out of balance with each one. So, for instance, looking at the choices of air, if we start in the east, the place where the dawn rises, all change starts with a single thought. So what are the stories that were running you in the last year? Yeah? What are the beliefs that you've been... And in order to identify them, you've only got to look at your behaviours, and then go, okay, well, what was the belief driving that behaviour, that choice, Was it fear-based, or was it serving love? And then now I have to flip it upside down because I'm Australian, so because we have a different magnetic spin there, we invoke the elements in the reverse order. But
even more connection to place, right?
Yeah.
Which is sometimes the missing piece, especially in the masculinity. Place is such a pivotal thing that can get overlooked. Like, what does it mean to be in this place in terms of how masculinity is showing up, in terms of who talks about this? Ian McKenzie talks about this, like talking about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a masculine man, and it really does depend on culture and place. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, nowadays we're seeing almost hyper masculinized men. There's a lot of pressure on men to look extremely buff, and it's even sort of hijacked the men's movement to some degree. I see a lot of men stuck in the warrior phase, which is the youth phase. And the king, so the difference between a knight and a king, psychologically and emotionally, a knight tries to prove how masculine he is through demonstrating how, big he is, because in a patriarchal culture, the masculine is programmed to look impressive, imposing, drive a Hummer, have a big dick, a big bank account, everything's inflated. Whereas the feminine is programmed to not take up space, to be a size 0, to be diminutive and appeasing, and, the opposite. So, we see men trying to sort of bulk up, and really it's like a puffer fish that says, I'm scared and I'm compensating. It's like wearing a billboard that says, I don't know who I am as a man. A king is a man who has descended to the bottom of the well and he has consciously met his nemesis, his deepest fears and vulnerabilities about himself, and integrated them. So he's married the bride within.
Mm-hmm.
And the young buck, he's running from being feminine. He associates being masculine with the opposite of being feminine, so he represses his feminine traits. Whereas the king is a man who has embraced and accepted his feminine traits, so he is whole. And that wholeness is like catnip to women, because you know, if someone doesn't need you,
Yeah.
they're not going to project mother onto you, which is what destroys the erotic charge in a relationship.
I want to dive into this deep.
There's so much to
Of
talk
course.
about. Yeah, go for it.
But I feel you were onto something with the directions. I'd love you to complete that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because then I threw in about the masculine in place. But let's make space for that.
Cool.
And
Okay, so basically the Holy Grail was a spiraling in to meet the self through, it's like an annual review of your choices, right? And
I love this.
Yeah, and spiraling inwards using the 4 elements, the 4 directions as the template, meant that on the day of the winter solstice, the lowest ebb of the sun, a man would be stripped bare, really consciously sitting with all the parts of himself that had made mistakes, made errors in judgment, and it was a day of reckoning. So he would scry into the Yule fire, the Yule log, you know, because fire can both, like all the elements, destroy or create. And he might walk the labyrinth, but it was a day of stillness, of silence. You know, the barrows that were built here in this land in the UK are man-made womb spaces. They weren't meant as burial sites. They were meant for death and rebirth, rites of initiation. You know, Newgrange is another one, you know, in Ireland. So, you know, we see now a resurgence of men talking about dark room retreats. Well, that's what the Grail was. It was an incubation retreat. So then after, on, you know, 5th day being ether, spirit, the day where you are facing your demons, which comes from the word daemon, meaning nature spirit. So facing your true nature. You would then spiral out again. So for each of the 4 directions, each of the elements, you're setting a clear intention for the coming year ahead. So then, on the 5th day after the winter solstice, December 25th, you would be welcomed home to the women and children who had held a vigil of light, singing Silent Night, Holy Night, all these sacred songs for your rebirth as the sacred son. And they would have been baking, decorating the house with dried oranges that look like the sun, slices of oranges and lemons, decorating the evergreen tree that represents, you know, the man who, because he's soul dominant, is eternal, is immortal, even though, like the stag, he goes to the forest to shed his antlers once a year so he can embody the sacred masculine.
So do you feel that we've got all of it wrong by taking the Christianity story literal, and it really is a story to represent what you've just described, and how we can step into our sovereignty or maturity?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much that we've got it wrong, but rather it was a ploy of a war state to hijack, appropriate our rights and distort them. Yeah, that, and don't get me wrong, Christianity, there are a lot of good people
For sure.
who identify as Christians. There are a lot of ministers that are doing great work creating community, supporting people. But the issue that I have is that Yeshua, as he was originally known, he was renamed Jesus by the Greeks, his teachings, you know, he was persecuted for trying to keep the Grail alive. So, as was Mari, his partner, and Magdalene. So it's the greatest insult to their legacy that their teachings, their practices, that they risked their lives for were distorted, and that, what people have been handed down with is a lie. You know, it's, just the fact that the idea of the sacred blood being turned into a sacrificial blood, you know, that what people are symbolically ingesting in communion from the Eucharist is a dead man's blood. Like, that's a dark occultist rite, you know, or even the charging up of one's body by marking the cross. That's like branding an animal. It's saying my body belongs to the cult. Yeah, I'm giving my energy to this thought form, this miasma, you know. It's dark magic, and we've been dumbed down to not understand the use of energy, the conscious use of energy, which is what magic is, and using sigils, using ceremony, because it was being used against us all this time.
So what do you mean by marking the cross?
So if you go into a Catholic church, people will make the sign of the cross on their body.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, it's like, you know, the allegiance to the flag. You are assigning your life force, your energy, to a symbol. You know, likewise, corporations use sigils. Yeah, and the more that we charge them up through their use, the more power they have. Hence, getting people to wear the Nike tick on their clothes.
I heard the other day that more people in the world now recognise the McDonald's M symbol than the Christian cross.
Interesting. I mean, I take issue with the Christian cross because it's, you know, as Bill Hicks, the comedian, said, it's like going up to Jackie Onassis with a rifle pendant on. You know, it's a symbol of torture. And the original cross, which was common to all of our ancestors, no matter where we hail from, was the even cross, which represents the diameter of the earth, Demeter, the earth mother as she was known in Greece, and the central pillar of connection between the earth and the heavens, the Sky Father. And when we have the balance of those opposites, the active and the receptive, light and shadow, spirit and matter, feminine, masculine, then we create harmony, or heaven on earth, through the balance by tilting.
That makes sense, doesn't it?
Right? That axis of the feminine, tilting it up towards the Sky Father, you are energetically creating imbalance. You're saying the masculine is going to dominate the earth. The mind is going to dominate the body. Our symbols are potent because the third eye only speaks in symbols. So they're being used against us. Hence they've been appropriated, like the caduceus has been appropriated by Big Pharma, which is a tantric symbol, awakening the meridians of feminine and masculine within the central pillar of our nervous system to create health and healing through awakening consciousness. But it's being used to peddle petrochemical substances that mask symptoms rather than heal.
I mean, the common story is that Jesus died for our sins, right? And we carry that cross to remember someone that sacrificed so much to spread a message of love and unity.
One could equally view it from another perspective, which says, like Prometheus, he was made an example of. If you dare stand up to the empire, you will be made an example of.
Sure.
You will be persecuted. You will be punished. You will suffer. And this is a reminder. You're all going to wear this to make sure you don't get too big for your boots. Yeah, that you fear the empire. I mean, even just to look at a church, that is not a building that says welcome. It says power. I was in Spain and I saw a church that had about 100 steps leading up to the front door. I thought, well, they're not really thinking about the elderly and the injured and the young, are they? You know? So, yeah. I mean, the
well,
fact
not now. I guess maybe when it was made, it was everyone had more mobility. Who knows? But yeah, I absolutely agree. I've been in many churches, even just looking for spaces to organise dances, let's say.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, just a free dance and just to create an event, a community event. And there's so much pushback. There's so much rigid ideas of what that's going to bring. And it just always seems like a hard, not always, but it has been for me. It always seems like a hard stop, like trying to create something powerful. Although there's an event that I've been a part of called Conscious Clubbing, and that's in a Reformed church in Newcastle.
Lovely.
Yeah, so there are magical things happening, and I mean ecstatic dances in Bristol, and there's an amazing venue there. Have you been there?
No.
Ecstatic dance, yeah, they do it in an old church. I remember going to one in Hackney Wick in London, which was in a mosque. That was pretty powerful.
Oh, I do love mosques. I love the dome.
Yes.
You know, I mean, all churches and mosques are all based on a woman's body. You know, it's those Gothic doors mimic a vulva, you know, and the big ornate doors on the mosques imitate a woman's vulva. It's like, you know, our bodies are the temple.
Wow.
You know, and for me, the divine cannot live in a man-made imitation of that. You know, in fact, we've been told the opposite, that it's heresy to say that the divine lives within us. But the three mystic traditions of the Grail, Sufism and Kabbalah were all hijacked and stolen to create the three monotheistic patriarchal religions, which use fear and guilt to dominate and control the minds.
Well, I think we know this now, really, as a collective. It's we might not have all the details, and I'm so grateful for you sharing this stuff, because it's powerful when a feeling, that's what the resonation is. It's like a feeling within me resonates with the words you're speaking, and I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, and I don't have to think about it for long before it like really feels, yeah, of course, like it is. You're entering a building and it's like this sacred space, but it's just a representative of the outer and the inner. And I don't think I've ever had that thought of going into a sanctuary or into somewhere that I place a value, and that being actually like as within, so without. It's like a representative of me, and everything really is always bringing me, I see life in that way now, like bringing me back to myself, and how is this true for me, like how I'm acting in the outer, how is this how is it happening in here too, and seeing it in that way, and seeing how I'm treating the spaces outside of myself, how does that reflect back to me? So it's magic, you know. I'd love to dive into your work a little deeper in terms of the sacred masculine. Sure. And what does it mean? How do you even answer that, the divine masculine? Do you make space for that language in your work?
Sure.
Like, how does it?
Yeah.
How would you describe the divine masculine?
I'd start by saying what it isn't. You know, it's not a man who eats clean, does yoga every day, and does a boga, right? That's kind of the false notion that's been taken on. And I see so many brothers desperately seeking to embody the sacred masculine, but not knowing how. And really it's through a mystic initiation with the sacred feminine. That's the irony. But the immature masculine will run from the feminine. He will be seeking a male indigenous master, a man who's connected to the
not
earth.
anymore. That I've met you. I'm seeking you now.
But it's because they're running from their mum.
Yeah.
You know, I don't need you. I'm a big boy now. I can do this alone. Look, mum, no hands. You know. So the Grail mysteries, it was men bowing to be initiated by the feminine. So, you know, the knighting ceremony, or even the proposal where he takes one knee, it's a humbling of the ego to say, okay, I bow to the intuitive wisdom of the feminine, rather than, you know, the experts or the mind, or, you know, is the authority. It's bowing to that which is greater. Not saying feminine is greater, it's that those who choose to incarnate into a female form, they're the fact that we're put through this humbling, you know, every 28 days of our ego being broken down, we have to be more receptive, okay, to what is, to how the cycles are initiating us. And so, you know, it's just like being initiated by an elder, a Merlin, you know, a man who has integrated the feminine within himself. I mean, all elderly people deserve our respect because they've been through more winters, which again demands a humbling of the ego. I don't even know, getting back to this, I get on tangents. Which is, I suppose, when I'm channeling, and then it's like, what was the question?
Well,
so the sacred masculine. Thank you.
This is the space for tangents, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, the sacred masculine is a man who embodies or seeks to embody all facets of his soul, on the understanding that the soul is multifaceted. It's like a diamond blueprint. It's a prism, you know, the yantra, the sacred symbol of the Sri yantra, which shows all polarities in perfect harmonic balance. That's literally what our soul's blueprint looks like when it's in balance. And it's made up of different archetypes. So the more we embody the 7 feminine archetypes and the 7 masculine archetypes, we are whole. And then we can be a vessel for embodying the divine in either a masculine form, which is a god, or a feminine form, which is a goddess. So the sacred masculine is a man who embodies the divine in a human form. But the divine is not just pure. The divine is the full spectrum of light. Yeah, the rainbow bridge within us, which you might know it as the chakra system. But it's the primal, it's Pan, the wild man, and Lilith, the primal feminine. It's the emotional selves, which is Aries, the warrior, Aphrodite, the muse. It's Athena and Apollo in the solar plexus, okay? In the heart, it's Cernunnos, the green man, and Demeter. In the throat, it's Chiron and Artemis. In the third eye, it's Hermes, the Magi, and Hecate, the crone or the witch, meaning a woman with her wits about her, a wise woman. And in the crown, it's Dionysus, the god of altered states, and Ishtar, who is like the ascended Venus. So we've got all of these gods and goddesses within us, and when we embody all of their facets, then we shine like a diamond, and we embody the divine here in the physical plane, 3D, the third dimension. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I suppose in a nutshell, it's a man who has humbled his ego to be initiated by the universe, by the cycles of the concert of sun and moon, earth and heavens, and bows to the intuitive wisdom that comes through the receptacle, the living Grail, which is initiated women. Yeah.
And why do you think all this has to take place? Why does it need to happen? Because this is certain lineages, right? This is certain. understandings and ways of interacting with the world and being in it, and not applicable to every culture and every, there's different ways of interpreting the outside world and how to come into wholeness. But why do you think you've resonated with this, all these different energies, more than others? Or I don't know, why does this make most sense to you? Is it the thing that's helped you the most?
So for me, the remembering of these practices came from a Kundeline Awakening I had in 97, living off grid. And I would love every young person to have a supported sabbatical in nature for a period of 9 months. I was in that environment for 10 months, but it's like a full gestation. Because when we're in nature, our natural self comes out and we can meet our true self without all the distractions of modern society. And so I remembered, I had past life recall going back to Mesopotamia, and the Grail, the Rosicrucius, it was honoured back there, and then it came through Egypt and then through Europe and then into Bridget's Isles, as they were called before they were renamed the British Isles. So it's in my DNA. It's I think we're all in a process of remembering at the moment, unveiling all of the deceptions that have been placed over the truth. So the more time we spend in nature, the more we remember who we really are. And that's unstoppable. And it's exciting. We've chosen to be here incarnate at this time for this remembering. So, it resonates for me as true within me, just as it resonates within others who hear it, because the body doesn't lie. The body recognizes truth. The truth is simple. Even a child can understand truth, whereas a lie is complex, and I don't know if that answers the question.
No, but it does. I think a lot for me, I'm just going to be radically honest.
Please.
I feel I make decisions on what I align with and what I choose to go with, more than things that I feel have been my karma or dharma or past life, or like visions or things I know I have to do, or my body feels like this is the rightful path. It's more about and this is the part of my upbringing, and this is gold for me, because all of what you're saying, like, you resonate with me, and I'm making more space for this in my life. Even when you mention directions and it's just like, oh wow, yeah, of course, like that makes so much sense to me. But then the sense making is also very head led, so I'm aware of that, and not trying to be so rational, because things if they remain up here, my life's gonna be very stagnant, and I'm not gonna have a good time because things don't need it. Sense making might be based in the senses, and if I'm trying to make sense of the world through what I can perceive, I have to know, based on just experience, not necessarily evidence, but experience, that there's way more going on than my senses can perceive. Because there might be a sixth sense, and that's...
Oh, there are.
Yeah, and then maybe you can tell me a whole framework to work from in terms of sensing.
Yeah. In fact, the first Grail rite, a man is introduced to the sixth senses, plural. Yeah, this is what the Excalibur, the mirror, the cauldron of plenty, these symbols represent. Being in right relationship with those elements then turns on those subtle senses of clairvoyance, clear inner seeing, clairaudience, clear inner hearing, clairsentience, clear inner sensing, precognition, being able to sense the future, intuition, inner knowing. You know, it's not just women that have a sixth sense, men that activate the feminine within, the Grail within, the bride within, also activate these six senses, which is what legendary leaders like Yeshua and Arthur did. Yeah, that's why they were so beloved. They were whole. But you speak, I feel, of being heart-directed, and that is the way of the Grail. Yeah, always attuning to your conscience on the understanding that's how the divine speaks to us directly. And if we're always following the heart impulse, and I don't mean, you know, yearning for unrequited love, love addiction, you know, that's not really the heart. That's actually more the sacral, you know, emotional sort of dependency and desire. But the heart is that subtle inner knowing. And I suppose the difference between when we're caught in the head, that's knowledge, whereas embodied wisdom is when you're feeling into what to do, and you'll either get an expansion or a contraction. Yeah, it's like, it's visceral, again, because we are sentient beings. So if you want to know the path of a heart, ask your body, how does this sit in my body, or how does this land? Yeah.
Trust, how does that feature in this, do you feel? Because there's one thing I've been leaning into more than ever, and it's a very new experience that I'm having with it, is trusting. I'm not sure in what, but I feel it's helping me facilitate things better.
Yes.
Just trusting, like it's made all the sense to be disciplined, but then surrender to the moment, to what takes place, to what's happening in this moment. What do I feel? And then going off those impulses and yeah, just some might call them guides, but it's more of like, I'm just responding to the now. And yeah, trusting is a big part of that for me. I'm actually trusting what needs to happen well. And if I have more clarity, if I make more space to be more clear, I can then, yeah, it just helps. It just
Well
helps
said.
in all capacities.
Well
Yeah.
said. I think trust is the word of the hour, as in we're in the transition phase of the great rebirth. It's a time of chaos. Things are going to become more chaotic as the old breaks down. So trust is the one trait that we most need to embody. Now, we cannot trust others if we don't trust ourselves. Yeah? And how do we develop self-trust? Intuition. Sensing into, okay, what feels right. If we go against that, then we'll learn pretty soon not to. But trusting in the unseen, that's what's called faith. Right? And we are programmed by the rational mind to view that as childish, a figment of our imagination, because the 10% rational mind is so limited it can't conceptualize the infinite intelligence of the quantum field, which is holding all of us and can always make a far more both intricate and simple plan that meets our needs in a graceful way that we could never plan for ourselves. There's an Egyptian goddess Nut, and she represents a great mystery, or the Native Americans call it great mystery, making sure that we create more space for the mystery to come in and meet our needs, so that we're not our own worst enemy. We're not overthinking, over-planning, and creating obstacles for ourselves. And I think we're all being initiated on this at the moment, to let go of control. And the way that the ego or the rational mind responds to chaos is to try and create more control. So even, bless them, the globalists that are trying to introduce this technocracy, this total surveillance state with the, social credit system that they have in China here. It's because they're afraid. It's because they're not connected to the interconnectedness of all life. So rather than fear them, we need to have compassion for them and just keep ourselves connected to the connectivity of the infinite intelligence, which is benevolent, loving wisdom. So the more we show up and do a practice each day, the more we're bowing our ego to great mystery, the more we partner with great mystery, and we can read the signs each day, and the more we follow our heart, our intuition, then we're guided through to experience grace where others are experiencing struggle. And that's how we live as a God, living heaven and earth, rather than as a scared child or a victim, always in reactivity to external circumstances.
Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree. Do you feel control has got us out of a lot of suffering? Is there space for that in the conversation around how much control we've collectively, let's say, moved towards, and how that's helped humans along the path? And I always think it depends on how far you go back. But if we just look at what we think is civilization in the last 12,000 years, it was our idea, or a few things happened for us to settle, and then like how do you view that, like the timeline of the last 12,000 years, to understand how we used to live and how we've moved into more control, more centralization? I think most has happened in the last 200, 300 years. But like, whereabouts do you think that fits in to the conversation? Do you know, because we have alleviated so much suffering, we are getting more of a, it depends on how you view this and what your perception is. I like to bring this in because I know a lot of people that I speak to, which I'll definitely be sending this conversation to, that's part, it's kind of like worth speaking to, because we have alleviated so many people from, sanitation, clean water, like food systems. Yes, they're going radically towards decline and just chaos, but we have and are getting more of our needs met than ever as on a collective level, I'd say, from what I've read and looked into. What do you think?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So
it's not
we might be
black and white.
meeting more of our physical needs, but our core intrinsic needs, our inner needs, not at all, and less so. So I'd like to make the distinguishment between structure and control. So when the masculine is working in the positive, it creates structure. The feminine principle is chaos. It's the harbinger of change, growth, death, which is all one and the same. But the gift of the masculine is creating structure, like a scaffolding for growth, just like a tomato needs a trellis to protect it from the winds of change. But the birth of civilization actually happened through the feminine during the age of Cancer, which is when, in Europe, it was noted that we could farm wild wheat. And this is why the baking of bread and the hearth was considered the sacred heart of the community, So, but what we need are the invisible structures as much as the physical structures. So structure becomes control when it's not balanced by the invisible structures of the feminine, which are the structures for social sustainability, which I spoke about earlier. So if we're only myopic in our focusing on sanitation and, the physical, so the bottom three chakras, viewing life only as physical, emotional, and mental.
Material.
Exactly, which is actually more rational material than it is emotional, then we're not getting the inner needs met. And they are vital. They are equally as important. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, the Holy Grail. So this is a series, a video series, but also a book?
Well, interesting you ask if it's a video series. I'm looking to partner with a documentary maker. You know, I would love to turn the book, which is just called The Grail, and it's available on Audible as well as in Kindle and paperback on Amazon, into either a docu-series or a documentary, because, you know, and this is why specifically I turned it into an audio book. I wrote it primarily for the collective brotherhood, and I know there are more men that are dyslexic than there are women, so I wanted it to be as accessible as possible. But nowadays, people are so time poor and so overwhelmed that watching something on Netflix is easier than reading a book. You know, if someone's nervous system is so elevated from overworking, they don't even have capacity to sit down and read, you know. So, I would absolutely love to make those teachings and that awareness more accessible through film and television as a medium. Yeah.
So the book, when did you write this book?
So I started writing the book in 2018.
Yeah.
And I finished it in 2020, well, let's say 2022. It came out on the 222 portal, February 22, on the second month, 2022. Because, primarily the Grail is about the power of union, of coming together and balancing those polarized opposites within ourselves so that we can then, you know, basically love will save the world. The Grail is about developing all forms of love: brotherly love, sisterly love, self-love, romantic love, erotic love, devotional love. And so all the practices are based on how to be more loving. And you can't have love without wisdom. So in a culture that doesn't acknowledge the wisdom of the mystic feminine, people pursue power more than love. Because when we don't believe love exists, we go for second best, which is power.
Interesting. Reminds me of the quote, everything in life is about sex, but from sex it's about power.
Well, I mean, you've only got to look at, you know, how much BDSM and even like the lingerie is all imitating BDSM these days. Bondage sadomasochism, for those that aren't.
I didn't know that acronym.
Yeah, but if we look at the tarot card for the devil, it shows a couple in bondage. Now bondage has become fashionable and is sold back to us as sexually alluring. But who wants to be manacled to somebody? Who wants to be in chains? Yeah? Who wants to be enslaved? That's what's being sold to us as sexy.
Do you want me to answer?
Please.
I think there's something around repressed psyche. There's something in Germany where they have the most animal porn in the world, and there's something about a repressed culture. This was maybe a couple of decades ago. I got told about, but yeah, it's there's something around that it's like there's a repression and a real constriction and contraction of I mean, 50 Shades of Grey, right? I think that exists in that space, and why that was such a popular book. Like, what does it actually mean? Like, and actually asking that question of why are so many people gravitating towards those types of energies. I think a lot of healing can take place in that space. I think that's a lot of maybe more like conscious evoking of that energy is around healing something that lays dormant. You know? Yeah.
Excited
Go
to
ahead.
jump into that.
Let's jump into the BDSM.
Man, to me it flags how many people are intrinsically disempowered, because whether it's 50 Shades of Grey or BDSM, it's getting off on power, either subjugating, you know, giving away your power, or dominating another person. It's the love language of the solar plexus, right? We have 7 love languages that, you know, relate to each of the chakras. And in the Grail tradition, we're here to do the Hieros Gamos, which is also the Tantric tradition, the Great Rite, which is awakening all facets of the God and God within, God and Goddess within, to have sacred sex during the vortices of the cosmos and the earth on the ley line power points to heal the earth through the alchemy of the alchemical union of coming together. But, porn, for instance, it is a way of leeching sexual energy. Yeah, so it creates an addiction when love isn't present, okay? Because love elevates, love is the ultimate aphrodisiac, love raises us up. If the energy is just kept in the base chakra, so it's purely animalistic lust, we're not raising the energy, and it creates an addiction because we're not getting the ultimate fulfillment, which we can only get through love, whether it's devotional love or, So what we've got is a case of sexual addiction being dressed up as sexy, because the collective is so ego dominant. It's like the hungry little caterpillar voraciously trying to feed the cavern within.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the Lover's card of the tarot, we see the same couple that we saw in the Devil card. But this time, she is looking up at the Herald Angel and he is looking at her. And what that suggests is when we invite the divine into our union, we're not desperately trying to get all of our needs met from the other person, which is what spirals us into a dance of entropy, of codependency, trauma bonding, projecting all our mother-father wounds onto each other and then resenting each other for not being the perfect parental, knight in shining armor or good woman that we hoped would save us. When we take responsibility for healing ourselves through having a shadow practice where we're inviting the light in to look at our own wounds and heal them, knowing that they're going to be triggered by intimacy anyway, rather than scapegoat our partner and then need to feel powerful by dominating other people. To me that just flags there's resentment and a lack of forgiveness towards the opposite if we're getting off on needing to dominate them. If we heal through sisterly love and brotherly love, then we can be in right relationship with our opposite. And I'm speaking to both the homoerotic unions out there as well as the heteroerotic unions, because in every union we have the active and receptive polarities of feminine, masculine within each of us.
Powerful stuff. Okay, I would love to distinguish then, because I think this is the ultimate question of what distinguishes us, and it's a mythology. I believe it's like the power of myth and the stories we tell ourselves. What is the collective myth around what it means to be human? And if we have in our awareness, whether we know it or not, that we are animals and we have this primal energy that doesn't, that we're no better or worse than animals, do we justify the behaviors? Because we always justify things one way or the other. We can justify anything to ourselves. So does that feed into this? And I'd love to get your insight on like where you're at with it. If I don't understand something or I'm trying to make sense of things, I look to nature to make sense. And what happens in animal kingdoms, and there's an absolute spectrum. And ultimately, I think what it means to be human, which I've arrived at, is it depends on environment, it depends on circumstances, just like gas, water, air. Like it does depend on pressure and different things. So when I look to nature and understand how love is or how sex is, there is this you can see a lot of dominance happening in nature. And is this about transcendence more than anything else?
Yeah, and transmutation, which is alchemy, the great work. Yeah, transmuting what is unconscious into conscious, like coal into a diamond, that which is dense into that which is crystal clear. So yes, we are animalistic, and we have to love and see the divine in our animal primal aspects. Hue means of the earth. Yeah, in Druid rituals, that's what's toned to open portal gates. So we are first and foremost of the earth. We're part of the earth. We're not separate. We're all indigenous. Yeah. And when we have that sense of connection, then we're immediately in the role of custodians, wanting to look after that which is us, the earth. But our DNA, we're hybrids. The Anunnaki was doing genetic engineering thousands of years ago, and they put together the stellar DNA of many of the star tribes. Hence we have the different races here on Earth. Yeah, we've got different star tribe DNA mixed with Cro-Magnon man. So we have this propensity to self-actualize. We're not just animal. We were created as a slave race, but it was inevitable that we supersede our enslavement. Yeah, because we have this hardwired into us that we want to fulfill our potential. We want to know ourselves as the divine. Yeah, and remember that we are interconnected. We are the omnipresent now. There's no separation. And when we truly know and live that, we cannot be enslaved by fear. We can't be bullied anymore into submission. And that's the test of the hour.
Wow. I'm going to be listening to this back a few times, I think. Yeah, I mean, you've touched on some incredible themes and topics, and yeah, testament to seemingly how much you've been diving into life.
Likewise. Thank you.
Is there any message you've got for men, women, people? Is there anything you want to speak to specifically that we might have missed?
Yeah. Just I want to speak to mania. That in the West we are conditioned to be productive. And so our way of responding to stress, which is fear, is to be more productive. And then we end up like rats on a wheel, becoming so busy we're not available to ourselves and each other. And when we're manic, we're more quick to anger, we're more impatient with ourselves and our loved ones. And it takes courage to acknowledge we're afraid and to face our fear directly, rather than just get busier and busier trying to put our finger in the holes in the wall that is destined to break and let those floodgates go. We have to break down. That's, the caterpillar breaks down to a fluid in the chrysalis, and we have to drown in our own tears. That's what the baptism is. We have to acknowledge that life isn't working. And so if anyone listening to this is feeling overwhelmed, like they don't have enough time, then it's a flag that what they're putting their energy into isn't sustaining them, isn't fulfilling for their soul, and that they're going through the motions, but those motions are a maniacal madness, and it's got to stop. And that may look from the outside like a complete failure. And it's when we are at a loss, when we are at that absolute low point, that the darkness births the light. So the death has to happen for the rebirth. So if you feel like you're swimming, if you feel like you're drowning, then the birth is near, but let it happen. Let yourself fall. Let yourself internally collapse.
Thank you for that invitation and permission piece. It's powerful. I often feel that if that feeling of struggle is so present, and that feeling of stress and overwhelm, you're feeling it, you know? It's there, it's on the surface. Like, let it breathe, give it space. You know? Let it in. Because resistance, everything you resist persists. Thank you so much. This has been incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We always end with a hug.
Oh, excellent.